When I first moved into the neighborhood, I was looking for peace. After years of living in a busy city apartment where car alarms and traffic noise were constant companions, I thought that joining a suburban community with an HOA would be the answer. The promise of well-maintained lawns, clean sidewalks, and shared amenities felt like a step toward a calmer life. But as I would quickly learn, the appearance of order often masks something far more unsettling. I had bought a modest home at the edge of the development, tucked away on a quiet cul-de-sac. It was perfect for me, especially because I was dealing with health challenges that required me to slow down. My doctor had made it clear, stress and overexertion were to be avoided at all costs. I had a condition that made daily life unpredictable, and sometimes even getting out of bed felt like a battle. Moving here was supposed to be a reset, a place where I could heal without the chaos of the outside world pressing in on me. For the first few weeks, everything went smoothly. I kept to myself, maintained my small yard as best as I could, and occasionally exchanged waves with the neighbors. Most people seemed friendly enough, but there was one presence I noticed almost immediately. The self-appointed queen of the block, known informally by whispers as Karen. Her actual name didn't matter. Everyone knew who she was the moment you described her. She was the type who walked the sidewalks with a clipboard in hand, peering into driveways and over fences, looking for any excuse to issue a warning. At first, I assumed I could stay off her radar. My home was in good condition, and I wasn't the type to throw wild parties or leave junk on my lawn. But my health meant that sometimes I couldn't tend to things as quickly as others might. And that tiny gap, that small crack in perfection, was enough for Karen to seize her opportunity. It started with a letter. The envelope bore the HOA's stamp, but the language inside carried a tone that felt oddly personal. It claimed my grass was not up to community standards. I was baffled. I had only been there a month and my yard looked no different from anyone else's. But sure enough, Karen had been making her rounds, and she had spotted a patch that wasn't as green as the rest. It was barely noticeable, but she saw it, documented it, and filed her complaint. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just a minor annoyance. I paid for a lawn service to come by more regularly, even though it was an expense I hadn't budgeted for. But that wasn't enough for Karen. Once she realized I was vulnerable, she pressed harder. Soon came another letter, this time about my trash bins. According to her, they weren't brought in quickly enough after collection. Then it was about a small garden flag I had placed by my walkway. A flag my doctor had actually encouraged me to keep as a symbol of motivation during recovery. Karen labeled it non-compliant. Each letter came with a thinly veiled threat of fines, and with each one I felt my stress creeping higher. This was the very thing my doctor had warned me about, the exact type of pressure I had moved here to escape. But Karen didn't know or care about my health. To her, I was simply another neighbor who needed to be controlled, another resident to mold into her version of perfection. The tipping point came one afternoon when I collapsed while working in the yard. My body simply gave out, and I had to sit down on the grass, struggling to breathe. A kind neighbor rushed over to help me, but just a few houses down, Karen stood on her porch, arms crossed, watching. I will never forget the look on her face, not concern, not sympathy, but something colder. She had spotted weakness, and I could tell she was already plotting how to use it. Sure enough, within days I received the harshest letter yet. It accused me of neglecting responsibilities and claimed my property was falling into disrepair. It was absurd. My home was fine, my yard was fine, and I was doing everything I could. But this wasn't about rules anymore, it was about power. Karen had found her target, and she wasn't going to let go easily. For a while I felt cornered. My health was fragile, and the thought of fighting back seemed overwhelming. But then something inside me shifted. I realized that if I kept letting her pile on stress, I was giving her exactly what she wanted. And worse, I was risking my own well-being. That was when I made a decision. I wasn't just going to push back, I was going to gather every tool, every fact, and every ally I could. Karen thought she could police my health, but she had no idea who she was really dealing with. What started as a series of petty letters was about to turn into a battle she would regret more than she could imagine. And with that resolve building inside me, the stage was set for the first strike in what would become an unforgettable fight. After receiving that last letter, I knew I couldn't simply ignore Karen anymore. What had begun as irritating nitpicking had grown into something targeted and personal. She wasn't just citing rules, she was weaponizing them against me. exploiting my condition as if it were some kind of weakness that disqualified me from being a proper member of the community. I started keeping records. Every letter that arrived in the mail went into a binder, carefully dated and filed. I took photographs of my yard after every minor task I completed, just to prove its condition. I even asked my lawn service to send me time-stamped receipts so I could demonstrate compliance. It wasn't because I believed I had done anything wrong. It was because I knew I needed evidence. Karen thrived on intimidation, but if I was going to stand my ground, I needed facts. The more I documented, the more I realized how irrational her complaints were. One week, she claimed my shrubs were encroaching on the sidewalk. They weren't. The next, she accused me of leaving unsightly items visible in my driveway. In reality, it had been a single package delivered by courier, left on my step for less than an hour. The pattern was obvious. Karen wasn't interested in the rules. She was interested in controlling me. Meanwhile, the stress was mounting. My health made everyday tasks difficult enough, but now I felt like I was constantly on display. Every movement scrutinized by Karen's watchful eyes. I couldn't even step outside without sensing her gaze from behind her curtains or porch rail. It wasn't just invasive, it was suffocating. Still, I refused to let her see me falter. I knew the moment I broke down, she would take it as proof that she was right. So instead, I quietly started digging into the HOA's bylaws. If Karen wanted to hide behind the authority of the HOA, I would learn those rules inside and out. What I found surprised me. Many of her so-called violations weren't violations at all. She was cherry-picking vague clauses, twisting them to suit her personal vendetta. That discovery gave me strength. If I had the truth on my side, then eventually she would slip. And when she did, I would be ready. The first crack in her armor came sooner than expected. One afternoon, while walking to the mailbox, I overheard two neighbors chatting. They were venting about Karen, complaining about how she had harassed them too. One mentioned being fined for having a child's toy left in the yard. Another said she had been written up for leaving holiday decorations up a single day too long. I realized I wasn't alone. Karen had built a reputation as the enforcer of perfection. But beneath the surface, resentment toward her was growing. That was when I understood. She didn't just want control over me, she wanted control over everyone. My health had made me an easy target, but I was far from the only victim. That changed everything. This wasn't just about defending myself. It was about standing up to a bully who had been running unchecked for years. I decided to test her. The following week, I left my trash bins out an hour longer than usual, fully within the window permitted by HOA rules. Predictably, another letter arrived. This time, though, I compared it against the exact wording in the bylaws. She was wrong. Completely wrong. And I had the proof. Instead of responding in anger, I made a copy of the letter, highlighted the relevant section of the bylaws, and filed it away. I wanted to see how far she would push her false claims before I made my move. And she did not disappoint. The very next month, she accused me of neglecting my yard again. This time during a week when I had receipts and photos showing the opposite. Karen's obsession was spiraling. She wasn't documenting actual violations anymore. She was inventing them. And every time she did, she handed me more evidence to use against her. But Karen wasn't blind to the fact that her tactics weren't working the way she had hoped. When her letters failed to break me, she escalated. She started showing up in person, pacing along the edge of my lawn with her phone in hand, snapping pictures as though I were some kind of criminal. She even knocked on my door once, demanding I step up to community standards. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Every photo she took, every unwanted visit was just more evidence. Still, the pressure was real. Each encounter left me exhausted and my health made recovery slow. But every time I thought about giving in, I reminded myself of that look she gave me the day I collapsed. That cold, calculating stare. She hadn't seen a neighbor struggling. She had seen an opportunity to assert power. That thought fueled me. As spring turned into summer, I realized the conflict was reaching a boiling point. Karen wasn't backing down, and neither was I. The binder I kept was now thick with letters, photos, and documents. The question wasn't whether she would overstep. It was when. And when she did, I would be ready to expose her for what she truly was. Not a rule enforcer, but a bully hiding behind the thin veil of HOA authority. The storm was building. and the first cracks in her carefully constructed control were beginning to show. By the time summer was in full swing, Karen's campaign against me had gone from irritating to obsessive. She was no longer satisfied with mailing letters or firing off warnings. Now she patrolled the neighborhood like a watchdog, clipboard always in hand, snapping photos of my yard, my driveway, even my porch. It felt invasive, almost predatory, and yet she cloaked it all under the pretense of community standards. But what Karen didn't realize was that the more she harassed me, the stronger my case became. Each unnecessary letter, each baseless accusation, and each unwanted confrontation was recorded, filed, and cataloged. My binder had grown into 2 thick folders, neatly organized and impossible to dismiss. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was building a record that exposed Karen for exactly who she was. The turning point came one humid afternoon in July. I was sitting inside, resting, when I noticed Karen pacing across the street with her phone held high. She was taking photos of my windows, zooming in as if she expected to find some hidden flaw. That crossed a line. I stepped outside and calmly placed my own phone in plain sight, recording her behavior. She froze for a moment, caught off guard before storming away. That single act changed the dynamic. She realized I wasn't going to cower. From then on, I started gathering support. Quietly, I spoke to neighbors, the same ones I had overheard complaining about her. At first, they were hesitant. Karen had a reputation for retaliation, and few wanted to put themselves in her crosshairs. But as I shared my binder of evidence page by page, their hesitation began to crack. I wasn't the only one with proof. Soon stories poured in. One neighbor had been fined for a harmless garden gnome. Another was reprimanded for their child's sidewalk chalk drawings. It became clear that Karen wasn't just nitpicking, she was terrorizing the entire community. With this new sense of solidarity, I began to formulate a plan. I wasn't going to fight Karen with anger or confrontation. Instead, I would fight her with her own weapon, the rules. By carefully following every line of the HOA bylaws, by documenting every action and every false claim, I would build an airtight case. And when the time came, I would bring it not only to the HOA board but also to the residents she had alienated for years. The first opportunity came during a scheduled HOA inspection. These inspections were routine, meant to ensure homes were well maintained. Karen, of course, tagged along with the inspectors, hovering like a shadow. When they arrived at my house, I was ready. My yard was trimmed, my bins stored properly, my porch spotless. Everything was pristine, perfectly aligned with the rules. Karen looked furious. She tried to point out imaginary flaws, gesturing at my lawn with exaggerated disgust. But the inspectors, guided by the actual bylaws, found nothing wrong. I could see her frustration boiling beneath the surface as they moved on to the next house. For once, her authority meant nothing. That small victory gave me confidence. I started taking small but calculated steps to challenge her power. I filed a formal complaint with the HOA board, attaching copies of her letters alongside evidence disproving each claim. I cited the bylaws word for word, showing how she had overstepped repeatedly. I didn't expect immediate results. After all, Karen had spent years embedding herself into HOA operations. But I knew I had planted a seed. Meanwhile, I kept rallying neighbors. Slowly, their fear of Karen began to fade. When they saw someone standing up to her and winning small battles, they realized she wasn't untouchable. One by one, they started voicing their frustrations openly. Karen, once feared as the neighborhood enforcer, was now being questioned by the very people she claimed to protect. But Karen wasn't about to give up her grip on control. Sensing her influence slipping, she escalated again. She filed a formal motion to fine me heavily, citing chronic non-compliance. It was laughable, considering the mountain of evidence I had proving the opposite. Yet it also revealed her desperation. She wasn't following procedure anymore, she was grasping at straws. When I received notice of her motion, I didn't panic. Instead, I prepared. I compiled every piece of evidence into a clear timeline. Letters, photos, receipts, witness statements from neighbors, and direct excerpts from the bylaws. My binder was no longer just a collection of paperwork, it was a weapon. The hearing was scheduled for late August. Karen likely thought it would be her final strike, the moment she broke me once and for all. But what she didn't know was that I had been quietly setting the stage for her downfall. As the date approached, the neighborhood buzzed with anticipation. Residents whispered about the upcoming hearing, many secretly hoping that someone would finally put Karen in her place. For years, she had wielded power unchecked. Now the balance was shifting and everyone could sense it. On the morning of the hearing, I felt a calm I hadn't experienced in months. My health still made every day a challenge, but for once I wasn't weighed down by fear. I wasn't walking into a fight unprepared, I was walking in armed with truth. Karen thought she had cornered me. What she didn't realize was that she had given me everything I needed to dismantle her authority piece by piece. The battle lines were drawn, and the next chapter would determine whether Karen's reign of intimidation would finally collapse. The morning of the hearing arrived heavy with tension. The HOA board had scheduled it in the community center, a modest building that usually hosted summer barbecues and holiday events. But that day it felt like a courtroom. Folding chairs were arranged in neat rows. A long table sat at the front where the board members would preside, and Karen was already there, perched at the edge of her seat with her stack of papers, glaring at anyone who dared look her way. I arrived early, binder in hand, steady and prepared. The air was thick with quiet whispers from neighbors who had gathered to watch. It wasn't common for HOA disputes to attract a crowd, but Karen had built such a reputation that people were eager to see the showdown. Some leaned in with curiosity, others with barely concealed hope that justice would finally catch up to her. When the board called the meeting to order, Karen wasted no time. She launched into her tirade, waving her documents and speaking with the confidence of someone who believed the outcome was already decided. She accused me of chronic neglect, repeated non-compliance, and claimed my property was lowering the standards of the neighborhood. Her words were sharp, rehearsed, and designed to paint me as irresponsible. For a moment, I let her speak. I let her stack her accusations high because I knew what was coming. When it was my turn, I didn't raise my voice. I simply opened my binder and began presenting my evidence. One by one, I dismantled her claims. When she accused me of neglecting my yard, I presented dated photos showing it trimmed and maintained. When she cited improper trash storage, I read directly from the bylaws and showed time-stamped proof that my bins were compliant. When she attempted to argue about my decorative flag, I revealed the section of the HOA rules that explicitly permitted it. Each accusation crumbled under the weight of documented truth. Karen's confidence began to crack. She shifted in her chair, her voice growing more defensive with each rebuttal. She tried to interrupt, but the board stopped her, insisting I be allowed to finish. The more evidence I laid out, the more her authority eroded. Then came the turning point. I revealed not just my own documentation, but statements from neighbors who had also been targeted. Copies of their letters, their receipts, their proof, all showing a consistent pattern of harassment and overreach. The board members exchanged glances. What had started as a simple complaint against me was now exposed as something much larger, a campaign of intimidation waged against multiple residents. Karen's composure shattered. She accused the neighbors of conspiring against her, claimed I had orchestrated a smear campaign, but the evidence was undeniable, and the more she ranted, the more unhinged she appeared. For once, the board wasn't nodding along. They were taking notes, their expressions hardening with every word. When I closed my binder, the room fell into silence. The case had been laid bare. It wasn't about one resident failing to meet standards. It was about one individual abusing her position to exert control. And everyone in that room could see it. The board called a short recess to deliberate. Karen stormed out into the hallway, pacing furiously, muttering under her breath. I stayed seated, calm and steady, chatting quietly with a neighbor who gave me an encouraging nod. For months, Karen had tried to grind me down with stress, but in that moment it was her mask that was cracking, not mine. When the board returned, their decision was firm. They dismissed Karen's motion against me entirely, citing insufficient evidence. More than that, they announced they would be reviewing Karen's role in HOA enforcement. The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Neighbors exchanged satisfied looks, some even suppressing smiles. For the first time, Karen wasn't the one in control. Her face turned red, her hands trembling as she gathered her papers. She tried to argue, but the board cut her off. The matter was closed. I wasn't guilty of anything. In fact, the only person under scrutiny now was her. Walking out of that community center, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't just about winning my case, it was about proving that Karen's reign of intimidation could be challenged. For months she had thrived on fear, but the truth had cut through her manipulations. Still, I knew this wasn't the end. People like Karen don't surrender power easily. She would lick her wounds, regroup, and try again, but now she wasn't just facing me. She was facing a neighborhood that had seen through her tactics. The tide had turned, and her once unchallenged authority was slipping through her fingers. The battle was far from over, but for the first time it was Karen who had something to fear. Karen's defeat at the hearing should have ended things. Any reasonable person would have accepted the outcome, retreated quietly, and tried to rebuild some dignity. But Karen was not reasonable. Public embarrassment only fueled her obsession. She wasn't just angry that she lost, she was enraged that her authority had been questioned at all. And when people like Karen feel cornered, they lash out. In the weeks following the hearing, her behavior escalated from harassment to retaliation, subtle at first, then more aggressive. I noticed her car creeping past my house more frequently, slowing as she peered at my property. She no longer pretended to be discreet. She wanted me to know she was watching. Neighbors told me they'd seen her whispering with others, trying to recruit allies, though most seemed uninterested after the spectacle she'd made of herself at the community center. Then came the anonymous complaints. Notes slipped into my mailbox, unsigned but unmistakably written in her sharp, curt style. They accused me of everything from bringing down property values to endangering the community by not disclosing my health condition. The cruelty was stunning. Karen wasn't just targeting my home now. She was targeting me personally, trying to weaponize my health against me. At first, I tried to ignore it. My doctor had warned me about stress, and I refused to let her drag me back into that spiral. But each new note chipped away at my patience. What Karen hadn't realized was that she was digging her own grave with every act of retaliation. I didn't throw the notes away. I added them to my binder, cataloged and dated. What she thought was intimidation was, in reality, more evidence stacking against her. Neighbors, once silent out of fear, began stepping forward. They saw what was happening, and now that Karen's grip was loosening, they were braver about speaking up. One told me she had been yelled at for leaving a stroller on her porch. Another admitted Karen had once threatened to fine them for having a mismatched paint shade, something the bylaws didn't even regulate. The more stories I heard, the clearer it became. Karen had built her empire of control on lies and intimidation, and now that empire was collapsing. Still, Karen wasn't done. One evening, I returned home to find a violation notice taped to my door. This time not from the board, but handwritten on loose paper. It claimed my yard was an embarrassment and ordered me to fix it immediately or face consequences. It was childish, almost laughable, but the fact that she had left it in plain sight for anyone to see showed her desperation. What she didn't anticipate was how the neighborhood would react. By then, people were tired of her antics. When a neighbor walking his dog spotted the paper on my door, word spread quickly. Soon, whispers turned into open frustration. "She's gone too far," one neighbor told me quietly. Another said, "We've all had enough." That's when the idea took root, not just to defend myself, but to end Karen's reign once and for all. The retaliation wasn't just about me anymore. It was proof that she would never stop. And if the community wanted peace, someone had to take action. I gathered everything. Not just my binder of letters and evidence, but also the notes, the photos, and the statements from neighbors. I compiled it into a single cohesive record, a timeline of harassment that painted a clear picture of Karen's abuse of power. This wasn't about petty violations anymore. It was about a pattern of targeted bullying, a misuse of authority that violated not only HOA bylaws but also basic decency. With my evidence complete, I filed a formal complaint with the HOA board. Not against Karen as a neighbor, but against Karen as a representative of the HOA. I requested a full investigation into her conduct. This time I wasn't asking them to dismiss her claims. I was asking them to hold her accountable. The timing couldn't have been worse for her. After the embarrassment of the last hearing, the board was already wary of her. Add to that the growing frustration of residents who had endured her harassment for years, and the tide had shifted completely. Where Karen once commanded fear, now she attracted resentment. As the board scheduled a special meeting to review the complaint, Karen grew bolder in her retaliation, as if sensing the walls closing in. She sent more letters, knocked on my door late at night, and even left her car idling in front of my house, but every action only fueled the case against her. Neighbors began recording her behavior too, sharing videos of her pacing the streets at odd hours, phone in hand, muttering to herself about standards and violations. By the time the meeting arrived, Karen was no longer feared. She was pitied, even mocked. Her attempts to maintain control had become so extreme that people no longer saw her as powerful. They saw her as desperate. For me, the retaliation was exhausting, but it also solidified my resolve. Karen had tried to break me, to exploit my health as leverage. Instead, she had exposed herself for what she truly was, a bully whose time was running out. The stage was set for the final confrontation, and this time, it wouldn't just be about me. It would be about the entire neighborhood finally standing together to put an end to Karen's rule. The special HOA meeting was scheduled for a Saturday morning, and by the time I arrived, the community center was packed. Word had spread quickly. This wasn't just another routine gathering. This was the day Karen would finally be held accountable. Neighbors who usually avoided HOA events showed up in droves, some standing along the back wall when all the seats were filled. The air buzzed with anticipation, the kind that only builds when a reckoning is about to happen. Karen was already there, sitting rigid at the front, clutching her papers like a shield. Her expression was cold, but her eyes darted nervously across the crowd. She wasn't used to being the one under scrutiny. For years she had controlled the narrative, directing attention toward others' supposed flaws. But now, the spotlight was squarely on her. The board opened the meeting by stating the purpose: to review formal complaints regarding Karen's conduct. Then they turned the floor over to me. I stood binder in hand and began. I didn't speak with anger or bitterness. I spoke with clarity. I presented the timeline I had built. Every letter, every baseless accusation, every retaliatory act. I showed photos, receipts, and highlighted the bylaws Karen had twisted for her own agenda. I included the anonymous notes, the late-night visits, and even the videos neighbors had taken of her erratic patrols. Each piece of evidence painted a picture that was impossible to ignore. Karen had abused her position, not to uphold community standards, but to harass and control her neighbors. As I laid out the case, I wasn't alone. One by one, neighbors began standing to share their experiences. A young mother spoke about being fined for her child's sidewalk chalk. An elderly couple explained how Karen had threatened them over their holiday decorations. Another resident admitted she had considered selling her home just to escape Karen's harassment. Their voices filled the room, steady and raw, until it became undeniable. This wasn't an isolated issue. It was a pattern of behavior that had poisoned the entire community. Karen tried to defend herself, but her arguments fell flat. She insisted she was simply enforcing standards and accused the neighborhood of ganging up on her. But the weight of the evidence and the chorus of voices against her made her sound hollow. Where she once commanded fear, now she appeared small, defensive, and cornered. The board didn't rush their decision. They asked questions, reviewed documents, and listened carefully. But it was clear from their expressions that they were seeing the truth. Karen's authority had been built on intimidation, not integrity. And now that foundation was crumbling. When the verdict came, it was decisive. The board stripped Karen of her enforcement privileges effective immediately. She would no longer have any role in policing the community, and any past fines or warnings issued by her would be subject to review. Furthermore, she was formally reprimanded for misconduct, with the possibility of further action if her harassment continued. The room erupted, not with cheers, but with a collective sigh of relief. Neighbors exchanged glances of satisfaction, some quietly clapping, others simply smiling for the first time in months. The reign of Karen was over. Karen, on the other hand, sat frozen, her face pale and lips pressed into a thin line. She gathered her papers slowly, her hands trembling. The authority she had wielded for so long was gone, and without it, she was just another resident. No clipboard, no letters, no power to intimidate. She tried to leave with dignity, but the silence that followed her out the door spoke louder than any words. For me, the victory was bittersweet. I had defended myself, yes, but more importantly, I had helped free the community from her grip. What had started as a personal struggle for peace had turned into a collective stand against a bully, and in the process I had discovered resilience in myself that I didn't know I had. Life slowly returned to normal after that. The constant stream of letters stopped, the late-night knocks ceased, and I no longer felt watched every time I stepped outside. Neighbors began greeting each other more warmly, no longer weighed down by fear of being targeted. The community that Karen had fractured was beginning to heal. As for me, I focused on my health, finally able to recover without the constant stress she had inflicted. I kept my binder not as a weapon, but as a reminder that bullies only thrive when people stay silent, and that sometimes standing up isn't just about protecting yourself. It's about protecting everyone around you. Karen had tried to police my health, to use my condition as leverage against me. But in the end, her obsession with control destroyed her own standing. She thought she could make me crumble, but instead, she crumbled under the weight of her own actions. And as I sat on my porch one quiet evening, watching the sun dip behind the rooftops, I realized something important. Peace isn't just about where you live. It's about knowing you fought for your place in it. And for the first time since moving into that neighborhood, I truly felt at home.